You can tell a good director in about 5 minutes. Doesn't take longer. If you've been around at all, you spot a director in 5 minutes.
You can identify a good director in 5 minutes. That was the conviction of Richard Widmark, one that was tested in the crucible of years in Hollywood. It takes no more time than that, he would insist. If you've been around at all, you can recognize a director in 5 minutes flat. Hollywood icon Widmark might have smiled brightly on screen, but off-screen he wasn't afraid to tell it like it is. Accustomed to portraying hard men, mobsters, and troubled antiheroes, Widmark brought the same rough candor to everyday life. Show business was a job, not a playground, in his eyes, and if standards slipped, he wouldn't hesitate to critique them. Throughout his career, he outed some of his co-stars and directors that he just couldn't abide working with. His bluntness sometimes appalled audiences, but it also pulled back the curtain on the gilded surface of old Hollywood, revealing egos, conflicts, and tensions that characterized the Golden Age. Among those whom he had his greatest scorn were Henry Hathaway, John Wayne, Phil Carlson, Marilyn Monroe, and even the esteemed Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky. Their tales and Widmark's starkly honest evaluations of them tell us as much about the temperament of the man as they do about the delicate equation of art, ego, and cooperation in Hollywood. Henry Hathaway, the militaristic taskmaster, Richard Widmark's image as a hot-tempered, no-holds-barred actor carried over far beyond his dealings with his peers. His conflicts with directors became almost as legendary, and few names angered him more than Henry Hathaway. Hathaway was an institution in Hollywood, recognized for directing tight westerns and hard-boiled adventure movies. His name was identified with discipline, hardness, and unyielding demands on the set. Widmark collaborated with him on a number of different assignments, amongst them Garden of Evil, 1954, and The Last Wagon, 1956, movies that provided Widmark with great opportunities, but also put him in perpetual disagreement with Hathaway's methods. Hathaway's directing style was as methodical as it was autocratic. He operated a movie set like a military encampment, ordering in a bellow that would not be contradicted. Scenes were done over and over again until they passed his strict standards. Actors were worked into the ground, sometimes publicly humiliated. To Hathaway, control and intensity were needed to grab real performances. For many, including Widmark, this approach was grating, dehumanizing, and more severe than it needed to be. Hathaway insisted on obedience without question. Actors had little room to bring their creative insights to the film. Widmark was not unfamiliar with discipline. He considered his work and took pride in professionalism. But he also expected respect. Hathaway's military approach, his yelling, berating, and relentless pressure, broke from tough professionalism into full-fledged abuse, at least in Widmark's opinion. In later interviews, Widmark famously referred to Hathaway as a son of a who treated actors without common decency. And yet, despite the process being loathsome to Widmark, he could not ignore the outcome. Garden of Evil and The Last Wagon were both box office hits, with Widmark providing performances that further established him as a leading man. This dichotomy, professional success marred by personal anguish, was symptomatic of Widmark's experience with Hathaway. The work looked wonderful on screen, but resulted in scars off-screen. Their conflicts betrayed a larger reality about Hollywood of the 1940s and 50s. Directors such as Hathaway, admired for their technical expertise, tended to establish their credibility on the basis of enforcing deference. Actors needed to survive these autocratic egos while attempting to maintain their own integrity. Widmark, never afraid of confrontation, navigated this minefield through a mix of defiance and practicality. He might have loathed Hathaway's approach, but he never let it short-circuit his performances. John Wayne, A Conflict of Titans at the Alamo, where Hathaway stood for the old-fashioned authoritarian director, John Wayne stood for something entirely different. The superstar who demanded complete control. The Making of the Alamo 1960 was one of Wayne's most elaborate productions, a grand, patriotic epic that dramatized the mythical Texan last stand. Wayne not only played the title role in the film as Davy Crockett, but also directed it, thus serving as the creative and symbolic hub of the production. For Widmark, who was to play Jim Bowie, it was a dismal experience right from the beginning. He had been hesitant to accept the role, aware of the great pressure that it involved working under Wayne. His instincts were right. Wayne's directing approach was formal, almost dictatorial. Everything, camera position, delivery of lines, blocking of scenes, was predetermined by him. Widmark, who prized collaboration and subtlety, felt claustrophobic. The friction was instant and furious. Widmark rebelled against Wayne's dictatorial style, and Wayne rebuffed Widmark's efforts to add complexity and nuance to his performance. Their fights were not merely over directing, they also expressed deeper differences of ideology. Wayne, notoriously conservative, imbued the Alamo with patriotic intensity that approached propaganda. Widmark, more cynical and less politically sympathetic to Wayne, objected to this messaging. Fights between the two sometimes lasted for hours, bringing production to a standstill and creating an hostile, charged atmosphere on the set. Crew members remembered that the battles between Wayne and Widmark were as melodramatic as anything the cameras caught. Widmark later encapsulated the experience with only 2 words, just terrible. He never forgave Wayne. And unlike most Hollywood spats, which dissipated with time, this one lingered until both men died. The blowback served to underscore the difficulties of laboring in productions ruled by giant egos. Wayne imagined the Alamo as a national monument. Widmark viewed it as a tormenting ordeal. Both men received what they desired in some form. The movie was made and is now a hallmark of Wayne's career. But for Widmark, the price was too steep. Phil Carlson, creative control and the secret ways. If Wayne and Hathaway embodied authoritarianism, Phil Carlson embodied conflict of another sort, conflict of creative visions. In 1961, Widmark appeared in The Secret Ways, an espionage thriller based on an Alistair MacLean novel. Widmark had a vested interest in the project. He co-produced the movie, and the screenplay was written by his wife, Jean Hazelwood. From the outset, he envisioned a story grounded in realism, tension, and psychological stakes, a departure from the flashy escapism of other spy films of the era. Phil Carlson, on the other hand, had another vision. Specialized in hard-boiled crime dramas and stylish thrillers, Carlson yearned for something more flashy, James Bond-influenced. He insisted on stylized sequences, sharp one-liners, and a glamorous gloss at odds with Hazelwood's gritty, realistic script. Widmark and Carlson were on a collision course from the early stages of shooting. Widmark, defending his wife's work fiercely, resisted Carlson at every opportunity. He demanded realistic performances and downplayed realism, while Carlson demanded spectacle. Scenes were filmed, refilmed, and argued over indefinitely. The cast and crew were caught in the middle as tensions grew. By production's conclusion, Widmark had practically taken charge. Although uncredited, he directed a lot of the film, so it would be according to his idea. This show of guts emphasized his dedication to realism, but also indicated his failure to compromise whenever he felt artistic integrity was an issue. The completed film was the stamp of both men. Carlson's stylistic touches were retained, but Widmark's direction kept it earthy at its core. The dispute proved Widmark's confidence in exercising control, not just as an actor, but as a producer and de facto director. To him, storytelling wasn't up for debate, it was something sacred. Marilyn Monroe. Beauty meets frustration. Not every one of Widmark's grievances were with directors. Occasionally they were with co-stars, and none more famously than Marilyn Monroe. In Don't Bother to Knock 1952, Widmark co-starred with Monroe, then poised on the brink of superstardom. Her arrival electrified Hollywood, her beauty and charm undeniable. But it was to work with her. Widmark afterward admitted that was god-awful impossible, really. His complaints weren't personal. He frequently referred to Monroe as a nice girl. The issue was her professionalism. She showed up late to set, sometimes spent hours in her dressing room, and often had trouble memorizing her lines. For an actor like Widmark, who prized rhythm, precision, and discipline, this was infuriating. The tension between Monroe's blinding screen presence and her disorganized work life encapsulated the paradox of her career. She was loved by millions, but sometimes not well suited for the strictures of Hollywood productions. Widmark's honest analysis deflates the myth of Monroe as a perfect professional, revealing instead a fragile, flawed starlet whose radiance had a high price tag for those who worked with her. But for his part, Widmark distinguished between Monroe the actress and Monroe the woman. He did not dislike her as a person. His frustrations were strictly professional. His candor gives us a rare look at the tension between talent and discipline, image and reality that characterized Monroe's legacy. Henry Hathaway, again the lunch standoff. Widmark's struggles with Hathaway didn't just occur in westerns such as Garden of Evil. Their most notorious confrontation happened on Kiss of Death 1947, the movie that made Widmark a star. Hathaway's continued shouting and raging brought Widmark to his limits. At one point of heightened tension, Widmark just walked off the set. Production came to a standstill. The two men lunched in strained silence, apart but unwilling to formally come to terms with one another. Widmark then went back on the job. The movie was finished, and his menacing work as Tommy Udo, laughing maniacally as he sends a wheelchair-bound woman tumbling down a staircase, became legendary. This episode demonstrates the bizarre duality of their relationship. They fought savagely, but the battle itself seemed to hone Widmark's performance. Hathaway's pressure resulted in diamonds on screen, although at the cost of bruises off it. Andrei Tarkovsky, brutal honesty on global cinema. Widmark's candidness was not limited to Hollywood celebrities. At a public tribute film showing, he was questioned about Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian director renowned for his contemplative, poetic filmmaking, such films as Andrei Rublov's Solaris and Stalker. Widmark's answer was appalling in its terseness. Tarkovsky? He's a phony. He stinks. The audience was taken aback. Tarkovsky was admired globally for his philosophical acuity and visual brilliance. But to Widmark, his abstract, slow-paced filmmaking was pretentious. While Widmark prized clarity, directness, and raw intensity, Tarkovsky sought mood, vagueness, and metaphysical concerns. To Widmark, it wasn't deep, it was empty. His words highlighted his lifetime devotion to authenticity. To him, art must speak directly to audiences. Anything that happened to be pompous or phony was useless. Though critics welcomed Tarkovsky as a visionary, Widmark branded him an imposter, whether or not one agrees. The remark is a reflection of the same unflinching frankness that characterized Widmark's entire career. He never compromised on his opinions, even if it meant going against critical opinion. Conclusion: Richard Widmark's honesty places